American picker star Frank Fritz has died at 60 years old, 2 years after suffering a devastating stroke.
We also learned today that American picker star Frank Fritz has died.
The removal of the old floor from the late Frank Fritz's mansion was supposed to be just another routine renovation project. But what the FBI discovered beneath the wooden panels turned the entire operation into a chilling ordeal. The team of forensic investigators alongside demolition experts had expected to find little more than aged insulation and perhaps some forgotten artifacts of historical value. What they uncovered, however, sent shockwaves through the room, leaving even the most seasoned agents pale-faced and speechless. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For years, the mansion stood as a testament to Fritz's eccentric lifestyle. A man known for his vast collections and a penchant for hoarding rare and obscure relics, his home was a labyrinth of history in itself. Towering bookshelves, antique furniture, and dusty trinkets cluttered the halls, each telling its own forgotten tale. To those who had the privilege of stepping inside, the mansion felt like a museum, one where Fritz had carefully curated the relics of bygone eras. But beneath its grand facade, something far more sinister had been hidden, something that would leave law enforcement officials scrambling to piece together the puzzle of what had truly transpired within those walls. As the wooden planks of the floor were pulled away, the first sign that something was amiss came in the form of a foul, almost chemical odor that seemed to rise from the very foundation of the house. The stench was unlike anything expected from an old structure. Dust and decay were anticipated, but this was something else entirely. It was a smell that sent a deep sense of unease rippling through those present, prompting them to don protective masks before proceeding further. Then came the true horror. As the last few layers of the floor were stripped away, a hidden compartment was revealed, one that had been painstakingly concealed, blending seamlessly with the rest of the architecture. Within the hollowed-out space, shrouded in layers of dust and darkness, lay a collection of items that no one had anticipated finding in the home of a man who, on the surface, had been known simply as a collector and enthusiast. What lay beneath the mansion told a different story, one that suggested an unsettling double life, riddled with secrets that had managed to stay buried for decades. At first, the team hesitated to move forward. The air in the room seemed heavier, as though the weight of what they had just uncovered pressed down upon them. The lead investigators signaled for a forensic team to step in, their gloved hands carefully extracting the relics from their hidden tomb. Each item pulled from the depths of the floorboards carried its own sense of mystery, objects of unknown origin, documents that appeared to detail transactions of a nature too cryptic to immediately decipher, and most disturbingly, something that sent shivers down the spines of all present. The dim lighting of the mansion flickered as the evidence was placed under examination. Some of the objects bore inscriptions, faded words scrawled in what appeared to be an archaic language, their meanings lost to time. Others were more modern but equally perplexing. Strange recordings, old photographs capturing faces that bore expressions of fear, maps with markings that led to locations far from the mansion itself. It was as if Frank Fritz had been sitting atop a treasure trove of secrets, each one more sinister than the last. What was clear from the start was that this was no ordinary discovery. The items unearthed beneath the floor did not belong to a single time period. They spanned decades, even centuries. Some were relics of a historical nature, while others seemed almost deliberately out of place, as though they had been hidden with a specific purpose in mind. The question that loomed over the investigation was why? Why had Fritz gone to such lengths to keep these objects concealed? And more importantly, what was the true nature of his collection? As the search intensified, more unsettling details came to light. Fragments of handwritten notes, penned in a hurried and almost frantic script, suggested that Fritz had been documenting something he had either discovered or been a part of. The notes referenced figures and events that, upon initial review, did not seem to align with any known historical records. But there was an urgency to them, a sense of desperation in the way the words had been etched onto the brittle paper. Among the discoveries, there was one that stood out from the rest. A box, unassuming at first glance, but containing something that made even the most hardened investigators pause before daring to examine it further. The box, sealed with layers of wax and bound with rusted metal clasps, appeared to have been hidden with particular care, as though it was never meant to be found. When it was finally pried open, what lay inside sent a ripple of unease through the entire team. The contents of the box were not just objects, they were pieces of a puzzle that suggested something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Documents hinted at dealings that extended beyond the mansion's walls, possibly involving individuals who had long since vanished from public records. There were references to events that had been conveniently erased from historical accounts, as if someone had worked meticulously to ensure that they remained buried. And yet, here they were, preserved beneath the very floor that Fritz had walked upon daily. With each passing moment, the mansion seemed to transform from a collector's paradise into something far more sinister. The implications of what had been uncovered were vast, and yet the full extent of the mystery remained just beyond reach. The FBI agents exchanged uneasy glances as they realized that they had only begun to scratch the surface of whatever it was that Frank Fritz had left behind. The room fell silent as the weight of the discovery settled over those present. There were more questions than answers, and each artifact pulled from the depths of the mansion only deepened the mystery. Who had Frank Fritz truly been? What had compelled him to hide these things beneath his home? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, was this discovery merely the tip of something even darker, something that had yet to be uncovered? The air inside the mansion had shifted. It was no longer the domain of a once revered collector. It had become something else entirely, a place of unearthed secrets, each whispering a story that had been waiting, buried beneath the floor, for someone to finally listen. As the investigation into the hidden compartment beneath Frank Fritz's mansion progressed, the FBI's forensic team worked meticulously to catalog each item, determined to unravel the deeper implications of what had been found. The sheer volume of artifacts concealed beneath the old floor suggested that Fritz had spent years, perhaps even decades, curating this secret collection, piecing together fragments of something that had remained hidden from the world. The weight of the discovery was undeniable. There was an eerie precision to the way each artifact had been arranged within the hidden space, as if placed according to a calculated order. Some objects appeared deliberately concealed beneath layers of aged linen, while others had been wrapped in materials designed to preserve them from the passage of time. The question remained, was Fritz merely a collector of the macabre, or had he been guarding something that was never meant to be revealed? The photographs were among the most disturbing finds. Some depicted figures that, upon initial examination, seemed unremarkable, ordinary people frozen in time by the camera's lens. But as forensic experts studied them more closely, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Many of the individuals in the images bore expressions of fear. Some caught mid-motion, as if trying to flee from an unseen force. Others appeared staged, their faces blank but their eyes betraying a deep sense of unease. The backgrounds of the images varied, some taken within the mansion itself, while others were in unfamiliar, unidentifiable locations. Even more perplexing were the written records, many of which had been painstakingly encoded. Some of the documents contained a ciphered language that linguists struggled to decode. Aged parchment bore strange symbols that bore no immediate resemblance to any known alphabet, while more recent documents referenced locations that, when cross-referenced, led to places long abandoned, places with histories that were anything but ordinary. FBI analysts worked to decrypt the messages, determined to uncover any potential connection between Fritz's secret collection and any known historical events. The further they delved into the hidden texts, the more apparent it became that Fritz had been involved in something far more extensive than a mere personal obsession with artifacts. Some of the writings referenced the acquisition of specific items, artifacts with obscure origins, some of which had been reported missing from private collections or museums over the decades. The implications were staggering. Had Fritz been involved in an underground network trafficking in rare, possibly illicit artifacts? The mansion itself, already an architectural wonder, took on a more sinister character as the investigation progressed. Every room, once thought to be nothing more than a chaotic treasure trove of historical relics, was now viewed through a different lens. What secrets had been hidden in plain sight for all those years? Had Fritz used the mansion as a front for something far darker than anyone had ever imagined? The floorboards were not the only areas that underwent scrutiny. FBI teams began inspecting the walls, tapping along the wooden panels and listening for any indications of hollow spaces. It didn't take long before they uncovered additional hidden compartments, some within the very framework of the house itself. Behind an old bookcase, investigators found another concealed section, this one containing even more disturbing artifacts. The discovery of what appeared to be ritualistic objects, a collection of carved stones, some bearing what appeared to be dried remnants of an unknown substance, added another layer of unease to the unfolding mystery. The deeper the agents dug, the more questions arose. Who had Fritz really been associating with? The discovery of old letters, written in different handwriting styles, suggested that he had corresponded with various individuals over the years. Some letters were postmarked from distant locations, while others were unsigned with cryptic messages that seemed to hint at clandestine dealings. Among the strangest findings was a set of audio recordings. The tapes were old, some so brittle that they had to be handled with extreme care. FBI technicians carefully played back the recordings, their contents sending chills through those who listened. Faint voices, some barely more than whispers, spoke in fragmented sentences mentioning names that had long since faded into obscurity. The recordings referenced specific dates and locations, some of which corresponded to known historical events, while others led to dead ends. But it was what the voices implied that truly unsettled the investigators. References to preparations and ensuring the cycle continues hinted at something ritualistic, something beyond mere historical curiosity. The discoveries raised more concerns than they answered. While Fritz had always been known as a passionate collector, the sheer secrecy surrounding these items suggested a motive beyond mere fascination. Had he been safeguarding these artifacts to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands? Or had he been part of something larger? Something that had remained hidden beneath the surface of his seemingly ordinary life? As the mansion was further searched, yet another shocking discovery was made. In a rarely visited corner of the estate's basement, a locked iron door was found, one that had been concealed behind layers of shelving and old storage boxes. The door, rusted with age, bore no obvious keyhole, suggesting it had been sealed off intentionally. After hours of careful work, forensic experts managed to breach the entrance, revealing a chamber that had clearly not been touched in years. The air inside was thick, stagnant, as if it had been undisturbed for decades. The walls of the chamber were lined with shelves, each stacked with items that ranged from mundane to deeply unsettling. Old journals, their pages crumbling with age, contained entries that hinted at something dark, something that had weighed heavily on Fritz's conscience. The writings detailed a growing paranoia, references to unseen watchers, cryptic remarks about the need to preserve the order. It was clear that towards the later years of his life, Fritz had become increasingly consumed by whatever secret he had been keeping. At the center of the chamber was a large, heavy wooden crate. It was different from the other items, more deliberately secured, wrapped in layers of thick chains that had rusted with time. The crate's exterior bore no markings, no indications of what it contained, but the atmosphere in the room seemed to change the moment the investigators turned their attention toward it. A deep sense of foreboding settled over those present, an unspoken hesitation holding them back from proceeding. But the investigation had already gone too far to stop now. With calculated precision, the team worked to break the chains, finally prying the crate open. What they found inside would haunt them for years to come. Nestled within the wooden confines was a relic unlike anything else in the collection. A metallic object, its surface covered in intricate engravings that bore no resemblance to any known symbols. The object pulsed with an almost unnatural sheen, as if untouched by time itself. It was cold to the touch, heavier than its size should have allowed. The moment it was lifted from its resting place, a sound, almost imperceptible at first, seemed to hum through the chamber, a low, vibrating frequency that set the teeth of those present on edge. The significance of the object was unknown, but one thing was certain. Fritz had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. The nature of the inscription suggested that it had origins far older than any of the other artifacts found within the mansion. What had Fritz known about this object? Why had he felt the need to keep it locked away in a room that had seemingly been designed to keep people out? The implications of the discovery stretched far beyond the mansion. If Fritz had been safeguarding this artifact, what else had he hidden? More importantly, had he been protecting the world from something he had uncovered? Or had he been a mere custodian following orders passed down through unknown channels? As the FBI continued their analysis, the case took a darker turn. The deeper they looked into Fritz's past, the more inconsistencies they found. There were gaps in his known timeline, years where his whereabouts were unaccounted for, unexplained travels to remote regions, and financial transactions that did not align with his publicly known activities. Had Frank Fritz truly been just a collector? Or had his passion for history led him down a path that few had dared to follow? The artifacts told one story, but the reality of what they meant remained elusive. The mansion had given up its secrets, but with every answer came more questions. The items found beneath its floors had been hidden for a reason, and now, in the hands of the authorities, they held a mystery that stretched far beyond the walls of one man's estate. The full truth of what Frank Fritz had uncovered in his lifetime was still out there, waiting to be unearthed. And as investigators continued to sift through the darkness, one thing became disturbingly clear. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. The deeper the FBI dug into Frank Fritz's mansion, the more unsettling the discoveries became. What had begun as a routine investigation into hidden compartments had now evolved into something far more sinister. An unraveling mystery that suggested Fritz had been entangled in a web of secrets that spanned generations. The mansion itself, once regarded as a place of eccentric historical collection, was revealing itself to be a carefully constructed vault, safeguarding artifacts and information that defied logical explanation. By this point, forensic experts and cryptographers had taken over the investigation, meticulously analyzing each relic and document found beneath the old floorboards. Every piece of evidence seemed to tell a fragmented story, but one common thread ran through them all: secrecy. The documents, some of them handwritten and others typewritten on yellowed paper, contained references to entities and individuals not recorded in any public archives. Names appeared and disappeared throughout the files, with some figures surfacing in multiple locations and historical periods, only to vanish without explanation. Among the more disturbing aspects of the find was a series of sketches drawn with almost obsessive detail. The images depicted symbols and structures that bore eerie similarities to real-world locations, though often altered in ways that suggested something had been hidden or changed. One particularly haunting sketch showed a circular chamber deep underground, its walls lined with symbols that bore no resemblance to any known language. The unsettling part? A match for the chamber's architecture had been found beneath Fritz's own mansion, though no such room had been discovered yet. As the FBI began to expand their search beyond the initial excavation site, they focused on other areas of the house looking for similar hidden compartments. The entire mansion was now under scrutiny, with specialists using ground-penetrating radar to detect any additional concealed spaces. It didn't take long before more anomalies were found. Behind an antique grand piano pressed against the far wall of the main hall, a false panel was discovered. It took forensic teams several hours to carefully pry it open without damaging the surrounding structure. But when they did, they uncovered yet another passageway, one leading downward, deeper into the mansion's foundation. A chill ran through the room as the dust of the long, undisturbed corridor billowed into the air. The passage was narrow, its walls lined with stone rather than wood, an indication that this was not merely an extension of the house, but something far older. The descent into the hidden chamber was slow, deliberate. The FBI agents and forensic experts, their flashlights casting eerie beams of light against the rough stone walls, moved cautiously, unsure of what they might find. The deeper they went, the more apparent it became that this was no ordinary storage space. The air grew colder, thicker, as if time itself had been suspended within these walls. As the door gave way with an agonizing groan of metal against stone, the FBI was met with a sight that sent a collective shiver through the team. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling supported by thick pillars of stone, the walls lined with shelves stacked high with items that defied explanation. It was as if they had stepped into a subterranean library, a repository of forgotten knowledge hidden beneath the mansion for an unknown number of years. But books were not the only things housed within this secret vault. The center of the chamber held something far more disturbing. a series of stone pedestals, each topped with an object that seemed deliberately placed. Some of these objects bore inscriptions, while others appeared to be carved from materials that could not be immediately identified. One pedestal, positioned at the very heart of the chamber, held a glass case containing what looked like an ancient manuscript. The manuscript was unlike anything else found so far. Its pages, seemingly untouched by time, contained text written in a language no one present could recognize. The ink, if it was even ink, gleamed under the flashlight beams, as if the words themselves held some kind of unnatural preservation. The feeling of unease grew stronger as forensic experts attempted to handle the document, realizing that even their gloves seemed to have difficulty gripping the pages, as if the material resisted being disturbed. As more items were carefully examined, a pattern began to emerge. The objects found here were not just remnants of history. They seemed to hold significance beyond their physical presence. Some of them emitted low frequencies when exposed to certain types of light. Others seemed to respond to touch in ways that science could not immediately explain. The air within the chamber itself seemed charged, as if something unseen was still lingering, watching. By now, the investigators had reached a troubling consensus. Whatever Frank Fritz had been involved in, it was no mere hobby. This chamber had been constructed for a purpose. Whether Fritz had been its architect or merely its caretaker remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. He had been guarding something. Something that others had either ignored or failed to discover for generations. The nature of the hidden chamber and its contents raised deeper concerns. If Fritz had taken such measures to keep this place secret, what had he been protecting it from? Or perhaps more disturbingly, had he been protecting the world from whatever lay within? The implications were staggering. Fritz's public persona as a collector and historian had concealed a reality that no one had suspected. The mansion, rather than being a place of nostalgic treasures, had served as a vault, perhaps even a prison, for knowledge that had been purposefully kept from the world. And if Fritz had inherited this responsibility, who had entrusted it to him? As the FBI continued their examination, external agencies and historians were brought in to analyze the inscriptions and objects. Some of the symbols bore striking resemblances to those found in ancient sites around the world, markings eerily similar to those in long-abandoned temples and cryptic texts from lost civilizations. The presence of these symbols in Fritz's mansion raised even more alarming questions. Had he discovered something that had been hidden for centuries? Or had he been part of something much older, much larger than anyone could comprehend? The discovery was not made public immediately. The nature of the findings required careful handling, as the significance of the artifacts went beyond the scope of standard forensic analysis. A deeper investigation was launched into Fritz's past, seeking connections that might explain how he had come into possession of these objects and, more importantly, why he had chosen to hide them. As days turned into weeks, the mansion became a center of intense scrutiny. More hidden compartments were found, some containing additional documents, others housing objects that emitted electromagnetic signatures not immediately explainable by modern science. The mansion was no longer just an estate. It was a living mystery, a place where the past and the unknown converged. This discovery forced the investigation into an entirely new domain. Theories ranged from the possibility that Fritz had uncovered a lost branch of scientific understanding to the more unsettling notion that he had been in possession of something that defied conventional history altogether. As experts attempted to piece together the puzzle, one question remained unanswered. Had Fritz succeeded in keeping his secret? Or had someone, somewhere, been waiting for this discovery to be made? The mansion stood in silence, its walls having absorbed the weight of history, its floors having concealed truths long buried. But as the investigation continued, the realization grew that this was not the end of the mystery, it was only the beginning. The mansion, once a place of historical curiosity, had become a vortex of speculation and intrigue. With every artifact unearthed, the sense of urgency grew. Whatever secrets Frank Fritz had been safeguarding were not meant to be discovered so easily. The presence of hidden compartments, encoded texts, and objects emitting inexplicable energy suggested that Fritz had been part of something much larger than himself. He had dedicated his life not merely to collecting history, but to curating knowledge that had been deliberately erased, knowledge that someone had gone to great lengths to suppress. the team of investigators faced an overwhelming challenge: understanding why Fritz had felt compelled to bury these artifacts beneath his own feet. Was it an act of fear, responsibility, or perhaps both? As forensic experts meticulously examined the underground chamber and the newly unearthed documents, it became clear that Fritz had not acted alone. The handwritten notes, some in his own penmanship, made references to unknown individuals, the ones before me and those who will come after. These cryptic phrases suggested a lineage of custodianship, as if Fritz had inherited a duty that he was never meant to speak of publicly. The most pressing concern, however, lay in the fact that Fritz was now gone. If he had indeed been a guardian of something dangerous or world-altering, what did his absence mean for those secrets? Had someone been waiting for his death, knowing that the mansion's hidden truths would eventually come to light? The implications of such a possibility were disturbing. It suggested that the discovery of these artifacts was not just an accident of forensic curiosity, but an inevitability, one that might have already been anticipated by forces beyond those present in the investigation. Further evidence of this theory came when FBI analysts cross-referenced Fritz's known travels with historical events. They found anomalies, periods of unexplained absences, records of bank transactions linked to locations far from his usual haunts. In particular, one entry stood out: a large, unexplained withdrawal made several years prior, coinciding with a documented excavation in a remote region of South America. What had Fritz been funding? And why had no record of his involvement been documented in public archives? More disturbing still were the final few pages of the discovered manuscript. When translated, they referenced a cycle, one that had repeated for centuries, one that was tied to specific times, places, and individuals. The text warned of a reckoning of the unseen, a phrase that, while vague, carried a weight that none of the investigators could ignore. Had Fritz been racing against time? Was he attempting to delay something, to prevent a chain of events from unfolding? The silence of the mansion, once a haven for forgotten relics, now felt suffocating, its walls heavy with untold stories. The team knew they had stumbled onto something far greater than a simple collector's obsession. They had uncovered a narrative that had been carefully erased from history. But what they did not yet know, perhaps the most unsettling question of all, was whether the true story had yet to begin. The discovery of Frank Fritz's hidden chamber had sent ripples through the investigative world, but the true weight of what had been uncovered was still settling in. As specialists continued their research, an unsettling realization began to take shape. Fritz had not simply been hiding artifacts. He had been protecting something far older, something that had defied time and explanation. The evidence suggested that the items in his possession were not random acquisitions, but pieces of a much larger puzzle, deliberately placed together in one location for a reason no one yet understood. The mansion, once a place of fascination, now felt like a fortress built to contain knowledge that had long been erased from conventional history. Experts in ancient languages struggled to decipher the final texts recovered from the chamber, finding patterns that hinted at warnings rather than documentation. The frequency-emitting objects, initially believed to be anomalies, were now theorized to be part of a system, possibly designed to obscure, conceal, or even suppress something that had once been active. But if Fritz had been the last guardian of this knowledge, what happened now? The lingering question haunted everyone involved in the case. Had they simply uncovered a historical anomaly? Or had they unwittingly disturbed something that had remained buried for a reason? As night fell over the mansion, casting elongated shadows through its vast halls, the weight of its secrets pressed heavier than ever before. Investigators knew they had reached the edge of understanding, teetering on the precipice of a truth too vast to fully grasp. But whether they were meant to uncover it, or whether some mysteries were never meant to be unearthed, remained the greatest uncertainty of all. The mansion stood in eerie silence, its secrets no longer concealed, but not yet fully understood. Investigators, historians, and scientists pored over the discoveries, yet the deeper they searched, the more elusive the answers became. Every artifact, every inscription seemed to whisper of something unfinished, an unresolved chapter in a history that had deliberately been buried. And then came the final chilling thought. If Fritz had spent his life guarding this knowledge, what, or who had he been guarding it from? The case was no longer just about what had been found, but about what might still be waiting in the shadows. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the FBI removing Frank Fritz's old floor? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.